Hello, 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 everyone. So that is the funnest saying that my little boy, when he was a little boy, used to say to get people's attention. But we are focusing on relative adverbs and some pronouns. Now we're really focusing on the three words where, when, and why, and helping you understand those relative adverbs. Now, we've already studied relative adverbs, right? But we're going to take a different take on it and helping you understand a little bit more. Some of it is going to be a little bit of a review because it's always good to have repetition. I want you to remember that relative adverbs, they connect two different parts of a sentence. What do they connect? Do you guys know?
And a dependent clause and an independent clause.
Awesome. So they connect a dependent clause with an independent clause. All right, so that's basically what they are doing. When the radiant heat turns on, does that make sense all by itself? It doesn't. So this is a dependent clause. Once you put the when on, you know you have a dependent clause. See how it makes sense when you take when off? The radiant heat turns on. It makes complete sense for it to, but once you put the when, now you need something else, an independent clause to make that make sense. Well, when the radiant heat turns on, what? You need to make sure that you continue on that. Now we have a couple of sentences here. Now we haven't talked about this before, so really want you guys to pay attention, okay? Let's look at this. December is the month on which we turn on the radiant heat, which actually we turn it on more like in October, but anyways. Now this, we're going to use a prepositional phrase as our connecting word. So see how this is connecting this clause to this clause? December is the month on which we turn the radiant heat on. The very first one, this sentence is formal. So I want you to understand the difference between a formal sentence and just how we speak, just a common sentence, okay? Now this is more common. December is the month when we turn on the radiant heat. Sometimes you have to change up your wording a little bit better for you to use a prepositional phrase. Now look, this is your preposition and this is the noun position of the sentence. So we're going to use the pronoun which. It's sitting in the object of the preposition right here. And we're using that as the connecting words. So this right here is more how we speak. This is more complicated. You have to think about it. But if you want your sentence to sound more formal, then use this way. If you want your sentence to sound just how we speak or something like that, use this. Okay? Now, let's look at another sentence. I'm going to read these two sentences and I want you to tell me which one is the formal one and which one is just the common one. The radiant heat system was flushed and running when winter hit. The radiant heat system was flushed and running at which winter soon hit.
Formal is the bottom one.
Formal is the bottom one. What's our connecting words?
At which.
At which. See how we're using a prepositional phrase to connect, to coordinate these two sentences together. Now, what about the first one? What's our connecting word? What's our relative adverb? When. So, see how this causes it to be a dependent clause. Now, the basement floor was warming when it started to snow. The basement floor was warming on which it started to snow. Which one is formal?
Bottom.
The bottom one is the formal. Which one is the most common? The top. So, and we're using the relative adverb to start that out. Does that make sense? So the radiant heat was turned on at which, what is this? Formal or informal? Yes, the radiant heat was turned on at which, is this formal or informal?
Formal.
Good. The radiant heat was turned on at which, is this formal or more common? Formal. We noticed it was not working. That's what happened. When the radiant heat was turned on, comma, we noticed it was not working. Okay, so now remember, if you start with a dependent clause with your relative adverb starting it, actually any adverbial word, right? After the entire clause, you want to insert a comma. Now remember, it's going to be an adverb clause plus a independent clause, right? Right? Or we can say main clause. Let's say main clause. So remember, or we can say dependent clause, main clause. That's how we can remember how you have to have it. This is a comma rule. You absolutely have to have that. Now, what if we have a main clause and a dependent clause? Do we need a comma?
No.
No, look, do these have commas?
No.
No. Do these have commas? No. So be really careful that you're understanding that comma rule, understanding how to put your commas in with your clauses. Also, when you want it to be maybe more informal, I had to switch this all around to make it sound proper. It won't always be where you could just add the word in and change it. You have to make sure it sounds all right. Remember, adverbs modify. Modify means describe. You're manipulating your words to help you understand what your verb is doing. They modify verbs. What do adverbs modify? Adverbs and adjectives. But I really, 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 really want you to remember, they modify verbs. They describe verbs. Adverbs do. Now, sign up in your mind. I'm signing up in your mind to understand that they connect sentences. They connect clauses. You can have two short sentences and put them together with your relative adverbs. Now, I want you to remember that the word how is not a relative adverb. Even though when we ask questions, they say ask where, when, why, and how when you're doing an interview. How did this happen? You're always asking that question on how to actually find your adverbs also. Your LYs are your adverbs, but there are also lots of other adverbs that answer the question how. So it's fitting in that category when you're asking questions. But it's not a relative adverb because it cannot start an adverbial or an adjectival clause. Can't do it. So just remember that how doesn't fit as an adverbial, as a relative adverb because of those reasons. Now, you guys, we are going into a really fun section that we have not talked about. Okay, so we are talking about conjunctive adverbs. Conjunctive adverbs. Now, I know that it gets so confusing because we have all of these different names and things, but it is important that you actually have these down. Now, I broke this apart. This is a Latin word right here. You have con, which is your Latin prefix, and junct. See, you have CT, that's right there says, I'm a Latin root. So, the prefix means with or together. What does con mean? With or together. Junct means to join or connect. I want you to remember that. It's connecting something. See, if we're joining together, we're connecting, we are connected. Okay? Richard and I are connected. We're married. We're joined at the hip. Now, so a conjunctive adverb means you're joined together, joined together, joined together, joined together. That's how we're going to read that. Joined, connected together. If you can remember what that means, it'll help you so much in knowing what the words are going to be doing. Conjunctive adverb, they help words function properly together. They help you understand more of the sentence or the paragraph, whatever you're trying to do. Now, I do think it's absolutely important that you look up on the internet or find a chart that you can print off and study your conjunctive adverbs. You need to study them. They are in no way related to relative adverbs. They're different. Once in a while, you might have a word that is the same thing as something, but they're still doing something different. Okay, you just need to recognize that. Now this is a very small, teeny tiny example of what I feel you should be looking for when you are trying to find something to study. It should have a category which says this fits in the examples, this is the same point. Then you should have examples of what they are showing you, what they're using. And then you should have what the common conjunctive adverbs are. So for example, we're going to say, well, the category is examples, and then here's what your conjunctive adverb is. You're going to use, for example, blah, 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 or blah, 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 for example, blah, blah, blah. So you're going to use it. You can use them at the beginning, in the middle, at the end of your sentence, however you're trying to combine it. These are combining words together. They're combining main clauses, they're combining just parts in your sentence. Oh, see, like another thing, for example, is for instance. Now, one for maybe same point is additionally. Now make sure that you do not forget to find something with examples, because those examples are going to show you how to use pronunciation. Something that's really fun, you ready, Paul? Is the punctuation in here. It's really fun. So you use a semicolon and with your conjunctive adverbs. So you're going to use them when using a conjunctive adverb between two main clauses. So that's when you use that. So see where the and is right here? That's where you would use, for example. I'm just putting that in. So you would have the first main clause, your semicolon, then your conjunctive adverb, and then a comma, and then your second main clause. Fun, huh? Do you like that, Paul? Does that make sense? Do you want me to say that again?
It's just confusing because it doesn't...
This is not a sentence. This is an example. This is just a sentence. You're going to use a semicolon, then your conjunctive adverb, and then a comma when using a conjunctive adverb between two main clauses. That's when you're going to use those together. We talked about commas and semicolons when you're using a conjunctive adverb. So this is an example. You have the main clause, then you have a semicolon, then you have your conjunctive adverb, and then you have a comma and then a main clause. So that's how it works. So here's an example. Volleyball times at the church are minimal. Look, semicolon. However, see, this is my conjunctive adverb, and then we have a comma. Times are more flexible before 1:30 p.m. So volleyball times at the church are minimal. However, times are more flexible before 1:30 p.m. So that's how you use your punctuation in there. Now, here's another way to use punctuation. Mom, comma, therefore, comma, advised us to play ball before 1:30 p.m. For any other portion of a sentence, use commas. See, look, these aren't, mom isn't a main clause. Paul, do you see that? Mom is not a main clause, so I'm not using a semicolon. See that? So if it's not a main clause, then just use commas. If it's a main clause, use a semicolon and a comma. If it's just another portion of the sentence and you're throwing in a conjunctive adverb, then you want to just comma it before and comma after. Now if you start one, you use the conjunctive adverb, and then you comma it, and then you continue on, right? It is very, very, very important that you punctuate correctly. Okay, so learn that on how to use that properly. I feel it is absolutely important that you get your conjunctive adverb list down. So my boys have not memorized this one, and so we're going to practice this, because when you're wanting to get something out on paper, if you have some of these words memorized, then you're able to pull them out of your hat. So we're going to actually read through them with you. So you read them as we read them and do them together. Accordingly, additionally, again, all in all, almost, also, anyway, beforehand, besides, certainly, comparison, comparatively, consequently, conversely, elsewhere, equally, finally, for example, further, for instance, furthermore, hence, henceforth, however, in addition, in comparison, in conclusion, in contrast, in spite of, in summary, incidentally, indeed, instead, lately, likewise, meanwhile, moreover, namely, nevertheless, next, now, nonetheless, of course, on the other hand, otherwise, rather, regardless, similarly, since, still, subsequently, then, thereafter, therefore, thus, undoubtedly, uniquely, and yet. We're actually going to try to practice these 5 times a day, about 3 to 4 times a week, so we can get them memorized before Daniel leaves home, and he's leaving home sometime this summer. All right, so I'm going to go through these again so you can hear my voice and be able to read them. Accordingly, additionally, again, you guys say in your minds, accordingly, additionally, again, all in all, almost, also, anyway, beforehand, besides, certainly, comparison, comparatively, consequently, conversely, elsewhere, equally, finally, for example, further, for instance, furthermore, hence, henceforth, however, in addition, in comparison, in conclusion, in contrast, in spite of, in summary, incidentally, indeed, instead, lately, likewise, meanwhile, moreover, namely, nevertheless, next, now, nonetheless, of course, on the other hand, otherwise, rather, regardless, similarly, since, still, subsequently, then, thereafter, therefore, thus, undoubtedly, uniquely, and yet. These are the most common conjunctive adverbs. So these aren't all of them, but they're the most common. Okay, now we're going to skip back on over to relative adverbs. Now, so I want you guys to understand the difference between a conjunctive adverb and a relative adverb. Remember when, where, and why, right? Where, when, and why. Where, when, and why. Those are the main ones that we were focusing on. Now let's look at it as in a question. Do you know when we purchased the bookshelf? Now, you need to remember, if it's a question and you're using when, it always equals time. Okay, when equals time if used in a question. That's what that means. So relative adverbs work as pronouns when acting in a noun position. So if you have a relative pronoun and it's sitting in a noun position, it's acting as a pronoun. Also, relative adverbs, they just give you extra information for understanding the sentence. That's what they do. They just give you extra information. There's different relative adverbs out there. Let's look at this sentence. It's going to come off of here. The snow fell hard. That is when the trees broke in our city. Okay, so let's, we see when the trees broke. So let's break this apart. See this, you guys? Where is your dependent clause in here, Dan?
When the trees broke in our city.
So our dependent clause is right here. And then Daniel also said right here. Can you see what happened here? That is when the trees broke.
That don't look right.
So, yeah, so this is how this works. When you're trying to diagram something like this, see how this is introducing a relative clause and it equals a pronoun. So look at how this is. So we have our independent clause right here, and it's going to attach to this one. I'm not going to diagram that one out. But then we have that is, and then what's this?
I thought that always goes on a dot.
Not always.
When?
This one is acting as the subject,
Well, when
right here.
describing-
I would say this has its own subject, this has its own verb, this is the subject, this is the verb, and this right here is your direct object, right here. When the trees broke. So this is actually sitting on a tree. And then you're going to diagram this out. So this one's actually acting as a relative pronoun because it's introducing this clause, okay, when the trees broke. And then in our city is right here. City, and then our. And it's describing. And see right here, we have our direct object, and then you're going to diagram this out.
I feel like there should be a comma at that in between part and that.
No, remember when we talked about that? When you say that, if you're going to use the word that, you don't take commas. If you're going to use the word which, it takes a comma. That means if you're using the word that, this is not a restrictive clause. Even though it's a dependent clause, it means that it is absolutely important that it's in there so you can understand what it is. Right here, let's talk about this again. We're going to talk about conjunctive adverbs again so we can remember what they are. Con means with or together, right? It's a Latin prefix. Junct means joined or connected. It's the Latin root. So conjunct means joined together, connected together, joined with. Okay? So if you can remember what that is, it'll help you that it's just a joining word. That's all it is. It's a joining word. Okay, bye everybody.
Bye.